YouTube, what is good? We're coming back at you with another video. Today, we're going to be going through MLB The Show 21 to MLB The Show 24. We're going to see which game was the best, which game was the worst. I know a lot of you are thinking one game might be the best, but hey, you never know. Let's see what ends up happening. Over the past 4 years, this franchise has gone through some major gameplay changes, both good and bad. We've had new features, and then just, either the lack of community feedback that they've received and heard of or anything like that, and then, actually making changes that are worthwhile. Over the last 4 years, that has both happened in a good and a bad way, but what game stands out the most? The reason I'm starting with MLB The Show 21 is because that is the first one that has been on all consoles, outside of Switch, but we'll get to that. But yeah, 21 is going to be kind of the baseline game that we're going to be looking at. But today we're going to be ranking them from worst to best, looking at everything, including the online experience, the content depth in that online experience or Diamond Dynasty, and then as well as franchise mode just as a whole. Franchise is probably going to be the baseline for the offline experience, which is why I'm saying this. That being said, though, let's go right into the first game. So if you've been playing the game since MLB The Show 21 specifically, I think it'd be no surprise that the worst game that's happened since MLB The Show 21 is MLB The Show 22. Although this was the first edition to release on Nintendo Switch, they did expand franchise's reach a little bit. It is still probably the most technically issued game that they've put out to date. But hey, we said there's Shohei Ohtani on the cover. We're going to have two-way players for the first time. It was supposed to be the modern era of baseball. Did that happen? No. Let's talk about why. So talking up first is going to be the Switch idea, the Switch debut. For the first time in the franchise history, MLB The Show became available to Nintendo Switch, or really any Nintendo platform at all. This was an exciting addition for a lot of players and was a really smart idea to do in international markets, as Switch is the most popular console in the world, especially in countries like Japan, where baseball is super heavy. Although this was a great idea, performance issues absolutely ruined the experience of this. As we all know, the Nintendo Switch is not the most powerful console, so you saw severe frame drops, you saw graphical downgrades, and then the online play just struggled to keep up with the counterparts on Xbox and PlayStation. Not only did it feel less fluid on the console itself, if you did play on PlayStation and Xbox and you ended up matching up with the Switch player, those players also felt that as well. The connection felt worse, the game felt slower, and unfortunately the execution of it really just wasn't great overall. MLB The Show also kind of threw a wrench into the gear at this point, where instead of having the, as we all know, the Matt Vasgersian commentary, they did change the commentary team for MLB The Show 22. It was Boog Giambi and Chris Singleton, who are still in the game now. They did debut in MLB The Show 22, and the freshness of the new voices in the game, I think, was an overall good idea. I think it kind of brought a new life to the game. However, because it was the first year, it did suffer from a couple of things, such as, limited variation. The commentary became very repetitive after a few games, especially if you played the same players kind of frequently. You just kind of heard the same things over and over and over again. I think we all kind of think of the joking ones like Jacob deGrom, the converted shortstop, stuff like that we all kind of know, and it just, you hear the same thing over and over and over again. A lot of people just turn the commentary off after a minute, myself included, but that is something that was a little bit different. On top of that, there was also the lack of the context-aware lines. A lot of times, the things that were discussed in the commentary didn't really match on the on-field action, and this is more just kind of bugginess rather than, anything specifically wrong with the commentary team. But, there were just sometimes things that would happen, and like what they say just literally was a completely different action. This is probably one of the more controversial changes in MLB The Show 22 because everybody loved how Matt Vasgersian was in the game. He was the voice for so long. There were so many different voice lines for him and his team, and unfortunately, this is just a change that they decided to make, most likely because of a Matt Vasgersian contract, so can't really blame them there. But, it was a change that not a lot of people enjoyed. Going into the content, it really wasn't anything to write home about. The content was worse than MLB The Show 21, which a lot of people consider to be the best. However, I don't think that it really was anything it wasn't bad, it wasn't good, it was just okay. We had that brief period between I'd say June and September where it felt like nothing was going on. But outside of that, I think the content was good enough not to really complain about it. It really wasn't it just wasn't memorable. You know, it wasn't good, wasn't bad. Moving on to the gameplay, though, this was probably one of the worst gameplays that we have ever seen in any MLB The Show, like, ever. You know, everyone says MLB The Show 18 is the worst. I beg to differ. MLB The Show 22 is probably the worst we've ever seen. Perfects resulting in outs, foul balls, you name it. Hitting mechanics just were not changed good in any way, shape, or form. Pinpoint pitching was refined a little bit. You know, it did have a little bit more of a skill level to it. However, it was kind of inconsistent from times, kind of going outside of those par regions. And then the animations were awful. You know, there are so many times where, you know, it was a really urgent play, you know, pop fly to the outfield, and he just kind of nonchalantly catch it and then throws it home, but it takes him 12 seconds to do that, and the guy's already scored by the time he even throws the ball. You know, the glitches in that, you know, playing the ball off the wall, it just did not work well. And then, of course, you know, if you played an Xbox, you know about this. There was a glitch in the game where the game would crash on the lineup screen. Of course, we all know you'd automatically get a loss at that point. Well, that was happening until November. MLB The Show comes out in March. This was happening in November. Now, luckily, it was fixed, but it took them 6 months to do so, and at that point, everyone was already sick of it, nobody cared, and everyone just kind of moved on. Overall, though, MLB The Show 22 was just an overall step down from its predecessor, which is like the experimental game, and, you know, I think, quite honestly, it was to a point where it just wasn't fun. You know, it got to a point where you just did not want to play the game. Coming in at number 3 is going to be MLB The Show 23. This might be a bit more of a controversial one. A lot of people consider MLB The Show 23 to be one of the better games that's come out, which I agree to an extent, but there just really isn't enough there to make it a top 2 game, in my opinion. You know, they did add things like Negro League storyline, which I think is overall great for the history of baseball and just for the average fan. But I don't think they added enough from previous games to really kind of make it a staple in the franchise. You know, it made strides in the storytelling and the representation within the game. However, I don't really think it delivered great on any other fronts. It also had the introduction of sets and seasons. I know that's a huge controversial thing. I don't think that's what took away from the game, quite honestly. I think the way they did that was decent, but you know, moving on, we'll talk about that in a moment. So going into the positives of MLB The Show 23, you know, we did see the storylines mode be introduced. We saw a lot of Negro League players that were not in the game previously that a lot of people have been asking for a good minute. You know, players like Satchel Paige, Josh Gibson, Buck O'Neil, you know, those were all great players to see in the game. And, you know, that representation being there to actually understand, you know, not only who these players were, but what they went through to get to, you know, if they made the MLB, you know, what they went through in the MLB, how to get there, and then just overall just what they went through as players just in general. We also got introduced to Bob Kendrick, who's an absolute legend. I think the whole community loves Bob Kendrick. It was a great representation, have narrating all of these storylines, and honestly just told a lot of great stories that, you know, like I said earlier, the average baseball fan can, you know, get enhancement in their knowledge of the game. Going into the gameplay aspect of MLB The Show 23, I do think it was a pretty significant improvement over MLB The Show 22, and I do think that they did a good job making the game at least like stomachable compared to the previous game. You know, they added new animations for urgency. They just kind of made things overall a bit more fluid. The technical aspect of the game, you know, the game wasn't crashing. If there were freezes, they kind of capitalized them up pretty quickly and, you know, fixed those issues. I think there's always going to be some sort of freezing issue, but they did do a good job at least trying to address those. The hitting logic, you know, it was better, but it still had some of those inconsistencies that we're still seeing today. But unfortunately, the game will just never be perfect. And, you know, I think we all need to come to that conclusion. They did add a new throwing meter. And I think early on, probably the first couple weeks of the game, was a really nice thing to have. It did add that little bit of skill gap between just kind of like your everyday player and being able to throw the ball hard and, you know, accurately. But I think by the end of the season, or the end of the game, no one really thought of it. It really wasn't challenging. It's just, it was something new for 2 weeks, and then we all just kind of got used to it, and we never thought about it again after that. Like I said earlier, MLB The Show 23 is when sets and seasons first got introduced, and I do think that system actually is not a bad system. I'm one of those people who does still believe sets and seasons can work. They just need a lot more legends in the game. However, my issue with the game's content wasn't sets and seasons as a whole. I think the idea makes sense. They wanted to change it up. The old way was getting stale, and honestly, good on them for trying to change that and, be experimental. I do think that the method that they use, where you could still use the previous season, that was good because your entire lineup wasn't obsolete overnight. And I do think that the idea of keeping the game fresh and constantly changing lineups, in theory, makes sense. But again, I think they need, just a lot more players. And unfortunately, it led to my main issue with it, where there were just a lot of repeat 99s. I'm not going to grind for a player that I already have that has a marginal difference. It's not worth it. It's not worth the time. And then, adding on top of that, if you're playing with a player that took you, say, 100 hours to get, and then his season is gone, now you can't use him anymore, and you feel like you just wasted all of that time, and you have to wait until the end of the year to use him again. Again, it was one of those things where it didn't work for this style of game. Also, MLB The Show 23 added captains for the first time, and I do think that the captain boosts were smart. You had actual incentives to run theme teams. However, I do think that captains actually are not a good thing anymore. Specifically for MLB The Show 23 as well, they did a really poor job balancing these captains. As we saw the switch hitter captain, the shortstop captain, the durability captain. They were just so overwhelmingly broken that those are the only captains that you can run, and the only captains that you wanted to run, because they just made your team just that next level. And I do think that if they are going to have captains and they're going to be like in the game and like a big part of the game, they need to find a way to balance them in some way, shape, or form. Unfortunately, a lot of the captains that we saw, both for MLB The Show 23 and 24, it was either they were so good you have to run them, or so bad you never even thought that you needed to run them in the first place. Concluding on MLB The Show 23, I do think the game made some meaningful strides in gameplay, especially that historical storytelling aspect. Story modes was a fantastic tribute to the Negro Leagues, and it is something that they are continuing, and I think is a really good staple that this game has. Unfortunately, sets and seasons did kind of ruin the experience for a lot of people. The gameplay was still kind of inconsistent as a whole. The pinpoint pitching was kind of messy. Things were going outside the parties very frequently. And there's a reason I haven't really said anything about franchise yet. It's because nothing's really changed in franchise from MLB 21 to 23. And, they did marginal things. Nothing really big changed. But it's unfortunately one of those things where, it is what it is. I will say, MLB The Show 23, I think, tried something. I have to give them credit for that. They tried something new, and it was executed kind of poorly, and that's why it ranks number 3 on this list. So do you remember when I said that the number 1 game might not be the most popular thought of game for number 1? Well, MLB The Show 21 is not the number 1 game since MLB The Show 21. It is the number 2 game, in my opinion, since then. Why, do you ask? Well, I have to say, MLB The Show 21 was a fun game. It was a very fun game to play, but from a technical aspect, from just overall gameplay, it really was not the best. They did introduce the Stadium Creator, and I do think that was a overall good thing to have. It was obviously something only for the next-gen consoles. PS5 and Xbox Series X just came out at the time, and I do think that having Stadium Creator is a good thing in the game. However, the stadiums really did not play well, and unfortunately, they introduced a lot of really bad stadiums into the game that just kind of broke the overall gameplay experience. The Stadium Creator was also really, not user-friendly. So if you wanted to create a really nice stadium really quickly, that just physically was not possible. You had to basically be a graphic designer to actually create a competent stadium. In MLB The Show 21, they did introduce pinpoint pitching for the first time, and I do think that was a overall very, very, very good thing to have. It gave you a little bit more control of your pitchers. You kind of had a bit more control of where the pitcher's going, and if you wanted to make an intentional mistake, the ball actually kind of went where you wanted to. Now MLB The Show 21, pinpoint pitching was a bit too strong. That's where the term super dotting was coined. Basically you just, if you had a perfect pinpoint, it went exactly where you wanted every single time. And halfway through the year, to combat that, they actually expanded the PCI to be able to go outside the strike zone. So for those of you who haven't played before MLB The Show 21, especially for like that first half of it, you used to not be able to have the PCI go outside of the strike zone. It would stop about, towards the edge of it. But to combat the super dotting, they did have it to where you could actually put the PCI outside of the strike zone so you can get hits and stuff outside. Moving on to the gameplay, I think the gameplay was fine. I don't think that there really wasn't any major changes outside of that pinpoint pitching. I do think the game was fairly balanced. I think there were a lot of like really bad home runs, off PCI stuff, poor timing, it's kind of the same stuff we see today. However, I think for MLB The Show 21, you did see it a lot more frequently than what you see it now today. I remember multiple times playing the game, having a ball leave the stadium on a ball that was not even close to the PCI. At least now in today's games, the PCI is at least kind of close to it, or it's at least touching the ball. At that time, it didn't even have to be close. It was just kind of random. And especially if you're playing at some of the higher elevation stadiums, it just simply it was a free-for-all in terms of what the hitting was. The content was good. I do think that this game does benefit from having a lower amount of 99 overalls, and I think MLB The Show 21 was one of those games that had less. I remember going back to it a couple months ago and seeing, wow, there really weren't a lot of super overwhelmingly good players. And I do think that the game benefits from that because it gives you a reason and a challenge to actually go get those players and make your team better than what it is today. Now, moving on to why I think this game is not actually number one is specifically because of its technical issues. If you go back to MLB The Show 21, and you compare it to the gameplay of MLB The Show 24 and soon to be MLB The Show 25 in terms of stability, MLB The Show 21 was a shit show. It was really not a game that was stable in any way, shape, or form. Disconnects were all over the place. Desyncs were all over the place. Now, granted, this was the first year that, Xbox and PlayStation were able to play together and all of these different things. However, it was not a built well system. There freeze offs left and right. A lot of players just turned off their crossplay altogether to avoid this, and it just was not a stable environment for this game. That, on top of the inconsistencies in the hitting compared to what we see today, I don't think is a game that I could rank as number one, even though the content on it was pretty strong. Moving on to the number one ranked, in my opinion, MLB The Show since MLB The Show 21 is going to be MLB The Show 24. And I know, controversial. A lot of players did not like the game this year, especially after May. Let me talk to you about it and let me tell you why. Looking in for the first time to franchise, MLB The Show 24 actually made changes to franchise. It made it a bit more of an easier to play experience. They improved their trade logic. They allowed deeper team management, long-term planning. They had like they kind of revamped the financial and the scouting systems, and really having like that March to October type feel where you can kind of like, they give you like key moments and stuff, I think really improved franchise as a whole. Yes, obviously MLB The Show franchise still needs a lot of work. However, MLB The Show 24 was really the first game that I actually felt that there was like a decent change in any of the last four titles. And again, this is the only reason why I'm mentioning it at any point in this video, because 21 through 23 were really just kind of copy paste. Yeah, they made small changes here and there, but 24 was really the first time we saw like anything close to a major change. MLB The Show 24 did kind of continue and double down on the sets and seasons idea, which again is a very controversial opinion. However, I think the way that they did it this year, I prefer the way that they did it in 23. However, for 24, I think they did it in a much smarter way. They didn't front load a lot of really good players early in the game, and the players that were really good, especially, you know, like your Derek Jeters, your Randy Johnsons, your John Donaldsons, the big 99 overall guys, you saw them more in like the middle of the year and the second half of the year. So it really wasn't like, you know, you got Randy Johnson day one, but you can only use him for a month, and then you couldn't use him at any point after that. You know, they kind of kept a lot of those really big popular players for the end of the year, at least for their best overall cards. Moving on to the gameplay, I do think the gameplay is the most refined that we've seen in any game so far of MLB The Show, just in general. Obviously, yes, again, it's still not perfect. However, the hitting engine was pretty solid this year for the most part. You know, a lot of the big issue, like weak contact hits that we've seen in previous years, did kind of get dropped a little bit. Yes, they still happen, but it's at a much lower frequency. Perfect outs are, you know, 85% or better for hits, which I think is acceptable enough. Fielding animations were improved, a lot more of the urgency type stuff. The one thing I wish they would get rid of, though, is super dives, but hopefully that's ending next year. Pinpoint pitching also was a bit more accurate this year. Every now and then the ball would go outside of the par on a perfect pitch. However, the vast majority of the time they did fall within that par region, and things just felt a lot more controlled compared to MLB The Show 23 and 22. MLB The Show 24 did get a lot of hate, especially after that first season wipe. However, I genuinely do feel that this game was probably one of the best iterations that they've made so far, and I do think it gets a bit more hate than it deserves. You know, again, like I said, this game is absolutely not perfect. There are absolutely issues with it that need to be fixed. However, compared to the last 3 games, I do think that MLB The Show 24 is overall the best refined game that we've seen so far. So there you have it, the definitive ranking for MLB The Show 21 to 24. You know, while every edition except for MLB The Show 22 had its strengths, MLB The Show 24 clearly stands above the rest when it comes to improvements of the core game. Thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this ranking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment on what you think is the best MLB The Show game in the past 4 years. And while you're at it, let me know your best one overall. Until next time, I'll see y'all again. I'll be seeing MLB The Show 25.